Well, I'm going to carry on assembling these components now. And first thing I need to do is put back the frame counter disc. Check that that's seated in position. It's engaged with this sprocket here. There's a spring goes on the top of that. And then a washer. I don't much like the look of that spring. The ends of the coils are not bound in tight in any way. They're inclined to pick up on the washer when you're trying to put it on there. I'm not sure how well that goes. I think it'll be okay. We get our spring and our washer in place on the top there, and then there's a circlip that goes on there. And it'll be a bit entertaining getting that clipped into place. Oh no, it's going to go. There we go. That's that. So that's that part done. Now, I don't know if we need to pass this shaft through next. This piece is a bit tricky to get in. You've got to get the leg on this tucked underneath the edge of the frame counter for all. That's really what you've got to achieve. So it's takes a bit of wiggling to get this in, I would think. I know it was a struggle getting the thing off, wasn't it? Coming from that end, will it go? Yeah, it looks like it might. Alright, I'm just test fitting this, so I need to see what more I need to do, see if there's anything else I need to worry about. This shaft needs to have a circlip on it to stop it pulling up through here. Now you have to, this whole piece here, you have to slide it back towards the centre of the camera in order to unhook it around this frame counter, as I've discovered. So the circlip on here. Well, as luck would have it, I've managed to lose the one that was there before, but fortunately I have another on hand. Doubtless the original will show up one day soon enough, as these things always do. That's fine. That shaft, of course, moves the rack down at the bottom, and that rack down at the bottom cocks the shutter. Now I've got to get the timing for this correct, but I can do that last of all because we have to put the gear on the top here, which will time it to this advanced mechanism at that point. Now it's not it doesn't auto re-zero or anything, that counter. You have to set it each time you load the film. Well, so far so good. This component, I have flushed that out with Naphtha and it all seems to be moving smoothly. That spring on the ratchet there is very enthusiastic to unhook itself when you're handling stuff. I've got to hook that back over that side there. and then you can see that that ratchet action works. And as it gets, this is the advanced stroke, as it gets to the end of the advanced stroke, the rack down here at the bottom of the camera would hit its stop, and you can, the ratchet can then falls into this gap so it can swing back the other way, and then you can return your advanced lever back to the rest position. Of course it would have a spring, a return spring on the advanced lever to take it back to the rest position. And at that stage the rack would move right back to the other end of its travel. And at the other end of its travel, the shutter has been cocked, and because the rack is moved out of the way, you can depress the shutter release and fire the shutter, and so forth. That moves nice and smoothly. Now I can see down in the body here, you might see a bright line. Now that's where it's been scraped, and it's probably been scraped by a grit or piece of grit or something along those lines has got under there and scraped that, I think. I've got to lubricate this with a little bit of molybdenum paste before I put everything all together. At the moment I'm just checking to make sure I am clear in my own mind where everything fits, and I'm also looking to see if I need to lubricate anything in particular. Now there's nothing that needs to be lubricated on the flame counter here really. That's a very simple operation. It's not going to jam up, it doesn't need any extra lubrication in there. It was just most important to get rid of the grit and rubbish that was in there. So far so good. Some lubrication perhaps. I'm going to lubricate this rack down at the bottom because I will have that effectively linked to the bottom of this shaft when I get the top part of the counter mechanism and film advance in place. So at that stage I won't be able to manipulate this as freely, and I want to be able to manipulate it so that I can swing it out of the way and put some molybdenum paste down on there where that section is going to run. Right, so I'm going to apply a bit of molybdenum paste to the inside edges of that rack where it runs over that stud. And that stud is raised so that this is actually held clear of the surface at that point. I'll wipe some on that shiny mark in case the bottom of the rack actually contacts that piece. It doesn't need much in there. And one other area I'm particularly interested in is this area at the front of the rack where it tucks in underneath this piece here. I need to make sure that that's got a little bit of molybdenum paste on it, just in case there's any roughness there. I don't want any galling. That's when metal gets damaged. You get a rough patch. It'll actually force a piece of metal up as it goes with the friction, and then that sort of grinds into it and you end up with a rough surface. After that it's very difficult to get things to move smoothly. Now a bit of synthetic grease. You can see the shape, the size of the teeth on that rack possibly down there. I don't know whether you can or not. They're quite coarse. They're not going to come to any harm the way they are. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease in that bush at the bottom. That's where the bottom of the shaft sits. Drop that into position. Good. Now this piece at the top for the film advance mechanism. I'm just checking to make sure there's nothing here that I need to lubricate first. I think I'll lubricate that bush slightly where the shaft comes through it. Again, I'm just using a bit of synthetic grease there. Now, I know I've got to come in from this side. Right, wriggling this shaft back through the hole is difficult because it doesn't want to go at that angle. I've got to lift it up. That's it. And then get it into the socket at the bottom. Now that leg's not tucked in correctly there, that's what's stopping that moving. That part looks okay. That part looks okay. Why won't this go in? It did go in. Okay, so that's all in and lined up. Now the timing here I can deal with when I fit the gear in place, so I don't need to worry unduly about the timing at the moment. Now we've got two screws. One here. One here, and that brass stud which acts as a support post for the frame counter setting wheel, just goes on there. And I'm just moving the rack backwards and forwards, make sure that that shaft rotates smoothly. Frame counter rotates smoothly. Film advance mechanism reverses, the ratchet's working smoothly. Alright, that should be about the park position when the advance lever's back against the body, would be about that position. Now I note that at that point the flaps on the top of this shaft are back forward and aft, so that's a handy reference point to keep in mind. Right, well I'll tighten that up. I'll fit the gear in place on the top of that shaft now, and we'll just watch the action and see what I need to do about moving that gear in order to adjust the timing. So this should be the rest position. And I can't move that because I'm already at the end of the stroke. So I'm at the wrong end of the stroke for that position. Let's swing that right through its advanced stroke, and the end of the advanced stroke would be about there. Let's pop that gear in place and see how that rack works now. Yes, that drops into the neutral position at the top here. That drops into the neutral position at the other end of the stroke. So I don't know for sure that I'm correct. I could be one tooth out. I won't know that until I go to put the shutter back in and find out whether it cocks the shutter correctly or not, but it certainly is moving correctly. Yeah, and it comes to the end of its travel at both ends. That looks good to me. I'm certainly willing to believe that that's correct. So we have a little cover plate that goes on there, and there was a star washer or anti-shake washer, and a screw there. Let's run those down. That should hold that assembly together. Well, that seems to be good to me. I think that's probably right. I'm also observing the frame counter dial here and seeing how that works. You'll see it advances one frame. So that's all working well. I haven't put any lubrication on any of the teeth of these gears here at the moment. I might give a little wipe to the ratchet teeth, and possibly a little bit of synthetic grease on the gear here might not hurt, but that's working fine as it is. Well, so far so good. So what else have we got up the top here? Well, of course we've got the counter setting wheel. This is nylon by the looks of it. It's certainly got a nylon look to me. It's a bit dirty looking. I'm going to be fairly cautious cleaning this. Nylon doesn't like alcohol, I think. I might be wrong about that. But it should be fine with a bit of naphtha. So here basically I'm just wanting to clear away any old grease and dirt really. Now there's a washer in there. That's fine, that can stay there. And I'm looking at the state of the teeth, cleaning out any grit and dirt that's become embedded in those teeth, because they'll just make things wear out. That looks fine. Put a smear of synthetic grease into the centre. That should fit over that shaft, and it does. Or you can even wriggle it down into place. That's good. That allows you to set the frame counter, and that of course would couple with this little piece, this little knob which pops up through the top cover. Well, that part of the body's done, I think. Oh, we've got our rewind knob, of course. Now the rewind knob, this is the ugly one. This is the one that came from the good camera that I'm to restore for the owner. So the ugly knob is just on the spare parts or leftovers camera, and in which is this one. I'll put a little smear of synthetic grease on the shaft of that. Should be able to slide that up into place. And when the top's on the camera, the rewind knob will screw on the top. So I'll just run that on there loosely. Just because it's a handy place to park it, it means I won't lose it in the meantime. I'll check that that spring is correctly positioned, so it's got a detent. It is. That feels good. I'm just looking, it might be worthwhile putting the advance lever on the top of the camera just so it's convenient to operate while I'm working on it, because I've got to get my shutter back in here and make sure everything's timed correctly. So I will just check my advance lever components here, make sure that they are clean, and make sure I'm clear in my own mind how they all fit back together. The camera's a bit awkward to work on at the moment because the tripod bush sticks up quite a way, so it's very unstable. I can't get the thing to sit on the bench tidily at all, so I'm just going to put the base plate back on there temporarily, just so it'll stand up a bit easier. And we'll just take 2 screws will do this. Yeah, that'll just mean that it won't be so prone to falling over on me while I'm trying to work on it, because otherwise it gets very annoying fairly quickly. So our return spring for the advance lever. There's a little hole here in the centre of this piece here, and a little bent tab in the centre of the spring which hooks into it. Like that, and I should be able to tension this up somewhat. Don't want to overdo this. I don't remember which post that came off, to tell the truth. Let's see how we get on. We're part way through the stroke here, I think. Have I got that on the right way? No, I haven't. So I'm back to front. That was stupid. That's the rest position. Forward, back, that's the rest position there. This should be pulling it back into the rest position, of course. Where's that hole? There it is. Around here. That's better. It has to be said that return springs of this kind are always a pain. This might be too tight now. Let's get that lever on there before it all decides to disappear into space. And put the retainer collar on the top. No, that spring's just bound up there. That's better. Now it's came off the post. Oh, why did it come off the post? Well, it came off the post because normally it would be held on the post by the top cover, which of course is not present. So we will forget about putting the return spring on here for the moment. I will very carefully disentangle this thing, so I don't want to damage it. How would I deal with that? A washer and a screw at the top would deal with that. I must have a screw to go there because one holds down the top cover. Let's see if one of these screw heads is big enough to retain that spring. No, it's not. I would need a washer, which I don't have. I'll find one. Well, suffice it to say that the spring really can't be fitted and remain useful unless there's the top cover on there to contain it, because otherwise it's able to ride up high and cross over itself, and then it doesn't work anyway. It's liable for damage. So we'll have to make do without the return spring on here while I'm testing the rest of it. But otherwise, the body's running very well. So I can just about pop that to one side now and turn my attention to this part, the shutter assembly part of the camera. And the shutter in this camera, that rack at the bottom of the body here moves this piece here, which cocks the shutter. Here's our shutter release lever at the top. There's quite a strong spring here which drives this mechanism. These shutters, as a result, are less prone to seizing up, if you like, from lack of servicing than the same shutter basically on a Retina Reflex. Because on the Retina Reflex, to a fairly large degree, the internal spring of the shutter is required to keep it working well. Here we have an external spring which is quite strong and certainly does most of the work. So, dismantling this, just seeing what I need to remove. There's a screw head visible here, one here underneath the screen tray, and one down there. It's a while since I've done a Bessamatic. I might even need to go and have a look at the book. Back when I figured that one out. Right, well, I've just reminded myself of how I go about doing this. Now, first thing I've got to do is remove the focusing screen assembly. Now, the focusing screen assembly is held down with this spring clip here. 2 screws hold that down, and if you don't hold the spring down firmly, when you undo those screws, it'll get away, or the screws will take off into space. Now, there are 2 adjusting rods here. They're used to adjust the position for infinity focus. They aren't necessarily the same diameter, although in this case they probably are. So take note of those and do not lose them. They just look like a needle or something like that. They're a thin metal rod, and they are used to raise the height of the ground glass screen so that you get correct infinity focus. So they'll come loose when I remove this. So first of all, I'm going to hold down that spring. Loosen the two screws off. Lift the screws carefully out of the way so they can't ping off into space. Let the spring up and unhook it from the other end. Lift out my focus rod, and it's pointed at one end, so that tells me it probably did begin its life as a pin of some sort. And the other focus rod, I'm putting those carefully down side by side, and I can see that they do not appear to be the same diameter. So I've got to make careful note that the thinner of the two rods is on the right hand side as I look at it here. Now the focus screen should just lift out. It does. I'll pop that carefully to one side. I don't want to damage that. That piece of sticky tape can come off because I don't know where that came from. Now this gives me access to... What does it give me access to? It gives me access to something. Screws here and here. 1, 2. It's a third screw there. I'm not sure how we go about getting at that. It's just two pieces. Now this rack assembly has to come off at the base of the camera. So I've got to mark its position carefully so I know where it's sat. In the cocked position, where does it sit? I'll take some measurements, I think, and write them down. Better still, I won't. I'll just take a picture and be done with it.